Welcome back for the second segment of Unit 7, Beef Cattle. And in this episode, we're going to talk about how to manage the calf crop and the calf herd. So let's get to our stuff here. So when we talk about feeding the calf crop, the basic ration in young calves, milk, obviously, so we got to make sure that we're feeding mama the right way, just as we focused on in the first segment. And then either pasture or forage, focusing on the quality of those things and making sure that as calves develop and grow a little bit and begin to graze or begin to consume the feed that we are providing out there for our cows, that it is nutritionally supportive of what they need to do. So some keys to this segment of feeding the calf crop, again, monitor average daily gains. And one of the things that you've perhaps heard me say, but I like repeating it, is you can't manage what you don't measure. And so if you don't know what your average daily gain in on your calves are, how do you know what to do in order to affect it if you're not happy with it? So monitor your average daily gain, which simply means taking some body weights from time to time. And then observe body condition score. You know that's one of my favorites. That will give you some early indicators on ration performance. Deworm as necessary as we have greater parasite risk. Out there with cows and calves grazing on pasture, we certainly need to have an intentional dewormer program in order to minimize that as a potential stressor. Weaning is going to occur somewhere in that 6 to 8 months of age range. And if we chose to wean a little bit earlier, perhaps we have reduced stress, reduced winter feed expense, potentially heavier calves as we get them started on a finish ration a little bit sooner. But basically, we're just simply removing the calves from the cows. Remember, there's no magic to that other than just simply pulling them away. And the cows, as milk removal stops, they'll stop making it. So, and the longer that you do some kind of interval weaning thing or slow wean, the longer it takes calves to get transitioned to your feedlot ration. Implants, as it relates to feeding, I don't particularly have a preference one way or the other whether you utilize the implant products that are out there. They're usually about 60 to 90 day effect, increasing your feed efficiency and average daily gain. They do have a role in help amplifying your feed effectiveness and boost your wean weights somewhere between 20 to 40 pounds per head. And you certainly don't want to implant any heifer that you would want to put in your replacement breeding program, because you will alter their hormone balance for a significant amount of time and therefore have trouble getting that heifer pregnant. So be careful that you're implanting the correct animals as well. So some keys in terms of feeding the calf crop, and let's talk creep feeding. Here's a great time to really hit on that. So some advantages to creep feeding. Certainly you're going to get heavier calves at weaning, and significantly heavier calves at weaning, and you better get that, otherwise it's not worth it. You're going to improve condition of your calves as they come off of the creep feed. Plus, they're going to be hopefully more uniform. They're going to be more uniform size, which creates more value for them to the finisher or the feedlot yard. And it can help minimize weight loss by your cows as well. So it helps in kind of an indirect way support the nutritional position of your cows. Disadvantages. It requires a lot of extra stuff: labor, equipment, feed, more management. It's, of course, more costly, and it absolutely masks the mothering ability of the dam, because when you wean a heavy calf that's been on creep feed, sometimes it's hard to tell whether that calf is heavy because of the creep feed or because of mama or both. And so it clouds that management picture to some degree. If we kind of finish our conversation a little bit here on creep feeding, a basic creep ration is going to be about 80 to 90% grain, and that additional room in there is mainly for any additives or things of that nature, but it's at least 80 to 95% grain, 3 to 5% molasses, a little bit of oil meal, commercial supplement, and then probably an ionophore like a Rumensin or Bobatec or Decox, something like that. But it better wean you a 30 to 50 pound heavier calf. It takes, generally speaking, as a rule of thumb, so that you can kind of get an idea what you need. it's about 8 to 10 pounds of creep feed per every pound of extra gain that you get. So you can start to put a budget together. If you want to know when is the best response to creep feeding, it's whenever you have poor or unavailable pasture. Some kind of situation like that where we've experienced extreme drought. Perhaps we've doubled our cow herd as a product of expansion. Don't have quite enough land base yet. That would be a time to creep feed and support those calves a little bit more. Okay, now as we talk about feeding the calf, certainly you have some options here. And the first one is, when we talk about preparing the calf for the feedlot, is what we call preconditioned calves. So from a feeding and management perspective of those, some mandatory things that we've got to do is get them weaned and started on what would be similar to a finishing ration 30 days prior to shipment to the feed yard. So they're going to get exposed to what that probably high corn or high energy based diet. They're going to get at least 30 days exposure to that whenever you are pulling them off after weaning time and pulling them off of your cow herd. They've got to be castrated, dehorned, treated for grubs and worms at least 3 weeks prior to shipment, and then finally they better be vaccinated at least 21 days prior to sale for IBR, Pasteurella, PI3, Clostridials, a number of different things there. So in order to even be classified as a preconditioned calf or sold under that pretense, they've got to get those things. The optional stuff, dewormed, vaccinated for lepto, BVD, Haemophilus, and they have to be owned by the seller at least 60 days prior to sale. I mean, that may seem like an odd one, but essentially what we are attempting to avoid here is where we've gone from farm to farm, let's say, and collected 10 calves from 5 different farms to create a load of 50, that then we are mixing them. They're going to create a lot of interaction from a health perspective. You're going to create a lot of interaction from a social perspective. So we want those preconditioned calves to be owned by the seller at least 60 days prior to the sale to the feedlot. So some advantages of preconditioning calves. Clearly, they better be in better health. If you're going to invest all that money, they better be in much better health on a higher health plane. They should, and most often do, transition to the feedlot much more efficiently, and so they start to gain weight much more rapidly on the feedlot, and that's why they bring somewhere between a $3 and $5 premium at the sale barn. Disadvantages, of course, is expense. You've got to invest all that time and all that money in all of those things that we've listed there, at least at minimum on the mandatory side, and then optional if you really want to capture a lot of premium on the optional side. So it is expensive, and it does require extra labor. You're going to have to work cattle a lot more often in order to accomplish all those things. So it requires a lot of additional labor time. So what are your other options for feeding the calf crop? And first would be what we call backgrounded cattle, where we wean calves on dry lot and pasture, and we're going to start to introduce them to a little bit of grain, but perhaps not totally mimic the feedlot ration like we would with preconditioned calves. You're going to get a little bit more emphasis than stockers, but we're going to not quite we're not quite going to feed them as much as preconditioned. Okay, stocker calves then, on the other hand, are weaned, and they've probably just been on pasture. They've or maybe a little bit of corn silage, but really not. They're basically just forage fed. They have very, very little finish on them. So they've been exposed to corn stalks, small grains, and grasses, things of that nature, but primarily just pasture. Again, all reaching the feedlot somewhere between that 600 and 800 pounds, but with varying degrees of finish and immune support. Replacement heifers, again, revisiting the concept of creep feeding here, we do get more genetic expression when we creep feed replacements, but it is higher cost. From a post-weaning perspective, if we are separating these girls out, we need some free choice hay, probably some mineral, and a little bit of grain supplementation because we want them to be gaining frame size and gaining weight at the appropriate rate. So how do we want them to develop? Well, we want them to be somewhere between 55 and 65% of mature body weight at about 15 months of age, which means they need to be gaining an average of 3/4 to 1.25 pounds a day. If we are below that, we're going to delay puberty and they're not going to come into heat fast enough. If we have higher than that gains, so let's say that we're averaging 2.25 pounds a day, average daily gain, they're going to get too fat, which has a negative correlation on reproductive success. Winter rations, again, we got to bump up that average daily gain rate because we got to support them through the colder months. Adjust accordingly. How do you know? Body condition score. That tells you a lot. So then they're probably going to need some additional energy. Pasture rations, again, targeting that 1 pound average daily gain, somewhere in that range. And then from breeding, from bred heifers through first calf heifers, you're going to feed them basically just like the cow herd and monitor body condition score. We certainly have to fold in how we would handle bulls here. Young bulls, again, the decision to creep feed comes back into play. But we need to have them ready to service between 15 and 18 months of age. And so, again, they're going to be about 2.5% of their body weight, and we need to push the average daily gain a bit higher on them to get them big enough. Yearling bulls to about 3 years of age. Again, if you want to hit right the middle of the range, 2 pounds average daily gain. We can start increasing the rate or the percentage of roughage in the diet in order to manage that body weight a little bit more. Mature bulls fed just like a cow herd. And then some seasonal influence that we've kind of talked about here. Monitoring body condition will really guide you all the way through. Okay, let's take our final break, and that wraps up segment